If one were to pose the question of who is the most interesting person in Hollywood culture in the modern era, the discussion would inevitably bring up Shia LaBeouf. The man has participated in many ventures, many films, both good and bad, and has unquestionably made his mark on both mainstream and independent pop culture. However, I'm not here to give you a backstory of the man, myth, and legend. There's a fantastic video on Scott Kramer's channel that takes a deeper delve into his psyche and his multitude of revenues of expression. What I'm here to talk about today is one of his least known movies that has had an immense impact on my life, and that film would be The Necessary Death of Charlie Countryman. Now, why am I making this video? Well, for one, I feel like there's a message here that's pretty applicable to everybody in the world right now or any time in the future, past or present. Plus, I've seen this film get critically panned and blasted by audience members, and I'm sick of it. It's time for this absolute gem to receive the polishing and showmanship that it is always deserved. So the plot is basically that after Shia, playing the titular character Charlie, sees his mother pass away, her spirit comes to him and tells him to go to Bucharest because it seems like the right thing to do. He travels there and meets Gabby, the daughter of a stranger who he's bonded with before that stranger passed away on the plane ride to Bucharest. He falls in love with her on the spot, and through a bunch of shenanigans with his hostile roommates Carl and Luke, and being threatened by her criminal husband Nigel, the feeling ends up becoming mutual. Now, the reason why this is all the plot you'll get from me is due to a couple of things. First of all, one of my reasons for making this video is to get the word out to people everywhere to watch this, streaming now on Amazon Prime, but more importantly, is this video titled A Plot Synopsis of Charlie Countryman? No, it's not. As the title of the video suggests, I'm going to tell you about how this film has changed my life. In order to do that, though, I will need to go through each time that I saw this film and the unique impact it had on me, respectively. I've watched Charlie Countryman in its entirety 4 times now. The first of my experiences was when I was 18 in my first year of college. During this time, I was dating my high school sweetheart, as one would call it, but we were getting to the point where I wasn't completely invested in the relationship and going through the incredibly rough patch of falling out of love with your first love. It was December of 2014, and I had just gotten back from a company party where she had gotten wasted, even though she promised me that she wouldn't. I didn't know anybody and ended up just staying in a corner of the room reading a book. I didn't originally have the book with me, I promise. I ended up getting it from my car. I didn't stop until she staggered over to inform me that her parents expected her home at 1, and it was midnight. As I drove her to her house, she participated in a bunch of incoherent rambling, but one of the main things I managed to decipher was her telling me that I was a pussy for not drinking and that I was too scared to end up like my father. My father was an alcoholic. I was silent for the rest of the drive, to and from. I got home at about 2, and due to the nature of winter break and my constant state of insomnia, decided it was the perfect time to watch a movie. And due to some bout of fate, luck, or whatever you would like to call it, I chose Charlie Countryman. This was back in the day where I had no knowledge of anything like Rotten Tomatoes, so I just went for it. Needless to say, I really enjoyed it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be very likely that I would be making a video on it right now. Now, would it? There was something bigger to it, though. A facet that really made me think in the dead of a snowy night, and that was the relationship between Gabby and Charlie. My girlfriend and I used to have what they had. The burning passion that makes it impossible to stay away from a person. Your person. The immense desire to run through the streets and explore with them, regardless of how many people were around, and judging. Having the most intimate conversations sequestered away from anyone or anything that could distract you from being present and alive in that moment. The feeling that the departure of either of you would put an end to the other in a blink of an eye. I had that. But I didn't have it anymore. I didn't have any of it. I was feeding off of those memories in order to trick myself into being full from that emotion. But that simply wasn't the actual case. I thought about that a lot in the following days. Over that time, I started questioning whether or not I was being an asshole for feeling the feelings that Charlie Countryman, of all things, had rustled up inside of me. We broke up less than a month later. She's getting married in August. Everything turned out all right. The next encounter comes about a 1.5 years later. In May of 2015, I was sitting down and scrolling through Netflix with my mom and saw Charlie Countryman again. Side note, shout out to Netflix for being a major part of my life changes, I guess. Never thought I'd be saying that. Anyways, I remembered the film fondly after pulling the memory of it from the remote space of my brain and asked for permission to turn it on. She agreed, and we started watching. Within the first 20 minutes, she was sound asleep on the couch beside me, but my mind was already racing. The part that hit my core this time was the very beginning of the film. Before his mother tells him to go to Bucharest, Charlie is lost in the world, floating around without any sense of direction or purpose, which was a mirror of the mind state I had found myself in. Going into college, I was of the thought process that I had to pick a career path in which I would find immediate success and with which I would be able to adequately sustain myself. So I chose education, and I was good at it. I'd always enjoyed working with kids, and for the first year and a half or so of university, I was able to convince myself that was the extent of what I needed to feel. Then my fourth semester came. I began feeling unmotivated. I stopped showing up to classes. I came home with failing grades across the board. I felt, for lack of a better word, lost. Yet, what could I change now? I had sunk 2 years of my life into preparing for this profession, and I was too far gone to restart now. Plus, what would I even pursue? Flash forward to the aforementioned viewing. I walked away from it thinking about Charlie and how he ended up, even though it wasn't in the manner in which he imagined, finding his path to love and his destiny, all due to a conversation with his mom. The following day, I sat down with my own mother and had what can best be described as an emotional breakdown. I laid out exactly what I had laid out for you all on the table, except with a lot more crying, and she stated in a simpler way than I could have possibly imagined. You're not doing what you love. So after immersing even more into that topic, I realized that my passion was film. Sure, there is a level of uncertainty once you attempt to join the industry, but I'd rather feel alive doing what I love than absent doing what pays the bills. So like Charlie, I took a leap of faith, switched my major to film production, and graduated with a degree 3 years later. So you could very well say that Charlie Countryman is the reason that I'm even pursuing YouTube, and therefore making a video on Charlie Countryman. As meta as that seems, I hope it makes sense. My penultimate viewing comes in August of 2017. To set the scene, I had just moved out of my parents' house for the first time and was spending my first week in a campus apartment. For the first 3 years of my time at university, I was pretty much shut in. The only people I spent time with were my family, my girlfriend, if I had one at any specific time, and my two best friends, but even the latter was a stretch for me. For the most part, I just went to classes, work, and the movies. That was the extent of my social life. One of my friends saw that, and he was concerned about me to the point where he asked me if I wanted to go to this music festival that was happening the weekend before school started. The price was pretty solid, and some of my favorite artists were playing there. That being said, once you isolate yourself from society for enough time, it becomes rather difficult to make the attempt to reintegrate yourself. So I told him that I would think about it, which, as many an introvert knows, is the signal of a pretty harsh no. That night, I finished unpacking anything, and afterwards, I decided to sit down on the couch and open up Netflix once again, and there is Shia LaBeouf's face, covered in luminescent and neon splashes of color. At this point, I was not aware of the direct correlation between small life decisions that have a gargantuan impact on my life and the film that I was about to watch. So, blissfully unaware of the power it possessed, I decided to watch it again. It wrapped up at about midnight, when I decided I was hungry and began a commute to Taco Bell. On my way there, I started to sense a feeling welling up inside of me that I hadn't had on my radar in a rather long time. Loneliness. I thought of Charlie, Luke, and Carl adventuring together in the middle of a wild nightclub and forming almost an immediate connection from the moment they met. But in order to form that connection, they need to actually put themselves out there for each other. This whole time, I expected that I would be able to just sit back and things would naturally sort themselves out. In order to fill the void I was feeling for the company in the backseat, I needed to be able to reach out to people, initiate the pull rather than waiting to feel a tug. So I called my friend and told him I was coming. Since that time, some friends have come, some have gone, but not for my lack of trying. In fact, I even have a podcast with one, Banter for Two on Spotify, SoundCloud, Patreon, and Twitter. And I would have never had that podcast without Charlie Countryman. So if you've been counting, or if you've made it this far in the video, you know that we've come to the final instance of Charlie Countryman entering my life, which would end up right around August of 2019. This is the month that I graduated, which, after sneaking 5 years into university, was a pretty big deal for me. Yet I somehow didn't feel that particularly excited. Don't get me wrong, I felt accomplished, but I was rather nervous about what the future was going to entail. I had chosen my passion to get a degree in, but what about all those voices along the way that told me the very thing I sacrificed a steady income for wasn't even profitable? In order to manage even a minor level of success, I would have to go to LA, build a team around me, network, and get lucky in doing said networking. And that was only to get a foot in the door. Needless to say, I was nervous. I secured a well-paying yet monotonous job at a bank that I hated, and I was starting to get the thought that I assume most artists do at some point in their life. What if this is it? What if I never make the break? What if my whole life revolves around being stuck in a muck of a paycheck-to-paycheck hell, where I have to work doubles to sustain myself, so in turn, I have no chance to make a creative output? So with all of this in mind, while sitting on the couch by myself on a warm summer's afternoon, I once again happened upon the face of Charlie Countryman. At this point, I was aware of the odd power the film held over me, so in a last-ditch effort to bring some semblance of reasoning to the shell of a life I predicted I would have, I began watching. All the while, I was searching for a sign, something that could give me inspiration for the uphill climb I was anticipating that would more than likely be the next 5 years of my life. Alas, time passed, and the film started to wind down without giving me even a glimmer of hope. And then, an inconsequential line, or one that I thought was inconsequential, came across my screen. During the waning moments before the final climactic scene of the film, Charlie sees a vision of his mother for the first time since the hospital. After a bit of banter between the two of them, she says, "You know, it's funny. When I told you to go to Bucharest, I meant Budapest." I let the rest of the film play out, but my mind was still stuck on those words. Charlie had gone through everything. The woman, the violence, the party, the everything, thinking he was sent here by a vision, which in a way is a sort of manifestation of destiny. Yet, at the final hours, revealed to him that this wasn't predetermined at all. He was the one who fought his way through and forged the route he was taking. Charlie Countryman, not destiny, made the choices to get where he was. I was going about my thought process all wrong. I had some type of idea in my brain that there was a set formula that I had to abide by in order to obtain what I love and desire. But if Charlie Countryman had taught me anything over the 5 years he had been in my life, it was that although there is already a sidewalk to travel on in front of you, sometimes the best thing you can do is to create a path of your own, whether that be with relationships, friends, career, anything you can possibly imagine. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find yourself in the place that you were supposed to be all along.